Okay, next we're going to hear about two projects to get the story of Edouard-Léon Scott de Martinville's life out so people can learn about it. First of all, a book and then a film. The book is being produced by Archeophone Records, which is run by Meagan, Hennessey, and Richard Martin. Archeophone Records is an award-winning reissue label dedicated to rescuing, preserving, and contextualizing the world's oldest records. Owned and operated by Meagan Hennessey and Richard Martin of Champaign, Illinois, Archeophone has produced 70 reissues. The one in your hands is number 70, all featuring substantial original research and top-flight liner notes. 6 other albums have received Grammy nominations for Best Historical Album and 8 for Best Album Notes, with their compilation of Lost Sounds, Blacks, and the Birth of the Recording Industry, 1891 to 1922, winning the Grammy for Best Historical Album in 2007.
Thanks, Jerry. So I'm sure a lot of you would like to know from our presenters today, how did you get into this? Which is a question we get asked a lot. And maybe some of what we have to say here will start to answer that question. Now, as we have heard, our understanding of the history of recorded sound has been unbalanced at best. Some contributions by some people have been overlooked, and others' contributions have gotten all the credit. This symposium, the handshake, has restored the balance. At least we hope, in part, it has. But I have to say, there is one area where Edouard-Léon Scott de Martinville, who I will call Leon Scott from here on out, where Scott does owe a debt to Edison. And most of you do not know this, so this will be news. The current surge in interest over these last 7, 8, 9 years in Scott is due, in large part, to something about Edison, specifically his filthy cylinders. Now, this is a box of the most profane recordings ever made in the 19th century, that's for sure. Surprisingly so. They're held here at the Edison site. And for a long time, there was rumor that Edison or somebody at Edison had made these blue wax recordings, but nobody had ever heard them. And, well, interest started swelling about 20 years ago, I guess. And Jerry was fielding all sorts of requests that were starting to make him kind of uncomfortable. And he approached us and Patrick Feaster and Dave Giovanoni, and he said, can't we do something where we do some scholarship on these things, make them respectable, put it in a CD and a book form where we can do justice to the material, we can contextualize the history, but we can also not bring Edison or the site into disrepute. So we said, sure, that's what we do. So a CD was born called Actionable Offenses, Indecent Phonograph Recordings from the 1890s. This was very well received, I'm happy to say, big book. And it got 2 Grammy nominations, Best Historical Album and Best Liner Note. There's the team at the Grammys in '08. We lost, sorry to say. But we were celebrating the release of the CD in the summer of 2007, actually, in Union, Illinois, a little town outside of Chicago, where they hold and you know all about it, John, an annual phonograph show. And over, what, Dave? Copious amounts of Italian beer and risotto, Dave said, what's next? By which he meant, to what end should we put our audio archaeology to use. And Patrick said, well, what are the oldest recordings in the world? And where are they? Who's got them? How do we make them, bring them to an appreciative public? And like Jerry, we knew the name of Edouard-Léon Scott de Martinville, but not much, just a few sentences. Patrick began to tell us things that were not common knowledge about Leon Scott, and we were emboldened. And we spent the next 9 months, put aside everything else that we were doing at the time, and began First Sounds, which you've heard of a couple times today. It was an informal collaborative, the four of us, with some other people in the room here who gave of their time, Mike DeVecca, Jerry Fabris, and others, whenever we needed it. But it was a DIY operation. Patrick became a one-man research machine. I mean, all that stuff you heard him saying earlier, he didn't know any of that back then. David self-financed numerous trips and wonderful meals in Paris to interface with the French academies. He did get access to the materials, as you see here, made archival grade preservation scans, and we set about trying to make these things talk. And, well, you heard today. There has been no discussion about the process of this today, but it took a lot of elbow grease to figure out how we're going to do it. Well, you don't need to know all that, but it did take time and effort to figure out how to get those squiggly lines into a sound form. Well, as you've seen, the result was front page news of the New York Times. This, now you get to see it in context, though, see? So that's the whole page, and we're below the fold. Jody Rosen wrote the article. Laura Seidel covered it for NPR. She was out there in Palo Alto with us, and it made huge news, international success story, and it changed the way we think about early recorded sound. Now, since this time, have I missed anything? Since this time, there's been a lot of activity too, and you're hearing the fruits of it today. Everybody had to go back to their regular jobs, but work has soldiered on. You can see a lot of it at the First Sounds website, original research, facsimiles of old documents, all sorts of goodies nested away in there, still very active. And I do want to take a minute here to appreciate David and Patrick, because they've really created this field themselves from scratch, from the ground up, with their own money. We don't have any supporting institutions, no funding, nothing like that. It's just people who don't like waiting in line, waiting behind red tape, who said, we're going to do it, we're going to find out a way to do it. If there's not a way to do it, we're going to invent it. So that's what First Sounds is. Now, Archeophone Records, which is what Meagan and I do, and we brought our skills as web designers, that's what Meagan does, and infrastructure, sound restoration and mastering, although you couldn't tell earlier, and other things, all the odd jobs we brought to the table. And now we're proud to bring it full circle here 9 years later with the book that you have before you. Book and Flexi Disc. Who remembers Flexi Discs with their National Geographic or Mad magazine? Very happy to reinvigorate another lost medium. It just seemed appropriate. And we're very proud of this volume. It's a really nifty little book. We're so proud to have Antiolier's essay on the life of Edouard-Léon Scott de Martinville. It's the first that I'm aware of, the first written account of his life. And of course, she's using the family papers, so it's the real deal. And it's also got essays by David and Patrick, some of which you've heard today, but I think there's a lot of other stuff too. It puts the book and disc put the other inventors of the day in conversation with Scott, which is again the purpose of what we're doing today. So we've got some phonautograms by Edison, Bell, and Berliner on their as well as the ones by Scott. So with that, I'd like to thank the Park Service, Jerry, and the dignitaries, Mr. Sloan and Mr. Scott de Martinville. It's been a pleasure meeting all of you. We're delighted to be here, and we appreciate it.